Today, we're going to be talking all about the war in Iran. As you guys probably have seen in the news, and if you watched my last video, I touched on it a little bit. The US is now unofficially at war with Iran. We're going to talk all about the conflict, the events that preceded the conflict and how we got here. And we're also going to be talking about what this means for markets. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and smash the like button. We're growing a lot right now at 268 subscribers. Thank you so much for everybody who's subscribed. If you're not, make sure to check out the channel. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. So at a glance, just last weekend, on February 28th, the US and Israel launched a joint operation targeting Iran's nuclear sites, their missile stockpiles, and key leadership infrastructure in the country. The strikes took out Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with other senior officers. The fighting has expanded across the region, including anti-Hezbollah activity in Lebanon, and the retaliatory strikes from Iran into several Gulf countries like the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and this has triggered a shipping oil crisis across the region. The Strait of Hormuz, which is one of the narrowest but also one of the most influential choke points when it comes to supply chains and specifically oil shipments coming out of the Middle East. This is a critical trading and specifically energy trading route, and in light of recent events, the Strait of Hormuz is now closed and this has pushed oil prices up. We're going to talk a little bit about the disagreement between Tehran and Washington and how the events unfolded leading up to the strikes on Saturday. So how did we get here? I mean, at the center of this issue, we have the core disagreement between Iran's leadership and Washington. Following the attacks on June of last year in three of Iran's main nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan, the US and Israel made clear that they would not settle for anything short of zero enrichment, a red line that Iran never considered acquiescing. Now, US officials have said that there is zero evidence to support that Iran resumed their enrichment after the attacks in June, or that they're trying to build a mechanism to detonate a bomb. Leading up to the strikes, the White House still seemed to be pursuing diplomacy, with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, traveling to Geneva on Thursday, just days before the attack, for a last round of talks. As I said earlier, the Americans wanted the Iranians to commit to zero enrichment and even proposed giving them free nuclear fuel for a civil nuclear program. And during the talks in Geneva on Thursday, Iran presented the Americans with a 7-page plan with proposed levels of enrichment. However, the numbers alarmed Witkoff and Kushner, who informed Trump that they did not think any deal could be reached. Now, critics say that the negotiations were merely pantomime, always doomed to fail, and that the rapid military buildup in the region left no doubts that Trump would go for a military strike. Before the strikes took place, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that no matter what, if Israel or the US attacked first, that Iran would respond with attacks on US bases and embassies. He says Israel was already determined to attack and that it would be best for the US to act in concert with Israel, since America would be dragged into the war anyway. So the question is, why wouldn't Iran give up its nuclear weapons? Now, this is not an endorsement of Iran, and to be completely honest, when doing research for this video, all of my research has been done through the New York Times and Barron's. And since I've been following this issue so closely, I do know about the critics of the current Iranian regime and how there were tons of protests going on in recent months and how many of those protesters were killed. With that in mind, in face of decades of growing instability in the Middle East, with a lot of Iran's neighbors being destroyed by the US and Israel in recent years, Iran saw enrichment as their only deterrent. Iran officials argued that uranium enrichment was a pride of their nation and that it was critical for their national security. Before Trump took office in 2016, we did have a nuclear deal with Iran. It was the Joint Comprehension Act. It was made by Obama.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States has achieved something that decades of animosity has not: a comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Now, in Trump's second administration, there were many enrichment options offered to Iran, including one where they could still enrich, but not on Iranian soil. The enrichment would take place at another country like Saudi Arabia or Qatar, and the centrifuges would be subjected to inspections by the US or Israel or the Gulf countries who would also be involved in that deal. Ultimately, Iran refused to give up enrichment. That was a red line they were not willing to give up. Another question that a lot of people have been asking is, how reliable are Trump's claims and his justification for the strikes? Trump asserted that Iran restarted its nuclear program, that they had enough nuclear material to build a bomb within days, and that they were already developing long-range missiles that would be soon able to hit the US. Now, Iran has made efforts to dig out the nuclear facilities that were hit by the US last June, but US officials say there's no evidence to support the claim that Iran has resumed its enrichment activities. It is true that Iran has a large pile of short and medium range missiles that can hit Israel and US bases and embassies across the region. But American intelligence still believes that Iran is years away from developing a missile that could hit the US. A report from the Defense Intelligence Agency from last year concluded that Iran does not have missiles capable of hitting the US, and that it may take as long as a decade before they can build up a stockpile of 60 intercontinental ballistic missiles. As far as nuclear weapons go, the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities last year in June has badly damaged the nuclear sites, and even if they were to dig it out, it would take them many months, perhaps even up to a year, to turn that into a warhead. And just a week before the attack, Secretary of State Marco Rubio acknowledged that there was no evidence that Iran had resumed enrichment. Now, what does this mean for markets? Now, despite the scale of the attacks, US capital markets seem to have little to no reaction, with the S&P closing pretty much flat for the week. One thing that I really wanted to talk about, which is very important, is the situation with the Strait of Hormuz. Every time Iran gets attacked, they threaten to close the Strait of Hormuz. And the Strait of Hormuz is this really influential strait, really tiny passage, which a major portion of global oil shipments go through. And just so you understand how influential this corridor really is, it moves a fifth of the world's oil and liquefied gas, including shipments from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE. For now, the strait remains closed due to these threats of attacks, and with insurance companies refusing to insure the vessels that go through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the most immediate effect of this conflict is going to be felt in global oil prices. And there's also a potential inflation pressure that could come out of these escalating conflicts in the Middle East. Large oil importing nations will feel the oil price hike the most, such as South Korea, who saw a 19% stock plunge this week. US inflation uptick could deprive investors of further interest rate cuts. Or worse, the Fed could cut rates like Trump has been asking and then be judged by the bond market. Consumers will likely see higher costs not only at the gas pump, but for each $10 increase to the price of crude, we could see raises to the inflation rate. Another factor that's really important to look at is what this means for the US economy, and specifically US debt. The US debt this year is set to reach $3.3 trillion, and this is not including the $170 billion we will have to pay in tariffs refund, or the cost of this war, which is now estimated to cost around $50 to $100 billion. And this is just an early estimate. Another huge cost is that these missiles that are being shot by Iran, they're very cheap, and Iran makes them really fast. And to shoot down these drones and missiles, the US and Israel are using Raytheon's $4 million Patriot missile, or the Lockheed Martin THAAD system, which comes in at $14 million per launch. And if we're talking about a long extended war, you can see how the tab can really start to add up, considering that Iran is able to quickly make these missiles and drones for very cheap, and we have to intercept these missiles using far more expensive Patriot missiles or the THAAD system. So in conclusion, the takeaway here is this war in Iran isn't just about nuclear weapons and missiles. The real question here is whether Iran will capitulate to Washington's demands, or are we at the beginning of a never-ending regime change war in the Middle East, yet another one. And as this conflict unfolds, the consequences aren't going to just be military. They will likely ripple through financial markets. We might see an uptick in inflation, and this may destabilize the global economy. I saw some people talking about this and talking about China. Well, realistically, Iran only makes about 5% of the total global oil supply. This likely will not be a huge hit to China, considering that China also has robust trading deals with other Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia. The real question here is, how long can we realistically fight this war for? With all that said, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked the video, make sure you smash the like button and hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about this conflict. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think the bigger picture here is. Please make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.